it's also important that the parents are on the same wavelength with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Again, when students used to go to church growing up, I heard many times someone would say to me, "Well, yeah, my dad was, this, and my mom was that, or my dad was Catholic, my mom was Presbyterian, or whatever." And so sometimes we went here and sometimes we went there. And almost all of them, when they got to college, they didn't go anywhere because they didn't want to choose between the two.
Mm-hmm.
If I choose this, but I'm going to, make my mom sad. If I choose that, I'm going to make my dad sad. I don't want to make either one of them sad. So for right now, I'm just not going to choose any of them. So it's important, especially if you're Orthodox, that both parents are Orthodox. And I know it's tough these days, and two of my kids married people that weren't Orthodox, but they became Orthodox very shortly thereafter. One was a catechumen when they got married. The other one became Orthodox very soon after. But that's very important. It's very important for the parents to be on the same page and both be ideally Orthodox, and so that there isn't that division and the kids see a united front, so to speak. That's very important.
Good evening, and welcome to another episode of the Willard Preacher Podcast. I'm Matt, a former Penn State student. I am joined, as always, by Gary Cattell, who is affectionately known as Penn State's Willard Preacher. Hey, Gary, how are you?
Doing all right, I guess. That's what the students call me when they're being nice, I guess.
That's it.
I don't know how affectionate it is, but it's a title, I guess.
Right. Well, it's been a little while. I think the last time we recorded was toward the end of May, perhaps, maybe April. And I don't know, just busyness and other things. And we tried to line up a guest or two, and not that didn't quite come together. But anyway, it's good to see you again. It's good to be back chatting. And I understand you're on the kind of Penn State summer schedule, that you're kind of waiting for the summer session to begin shortly after the 4th.
Yeah, the summer session usually starts at the end of June. I think they started a little bit later. We only go out Mondays and Fridays,
Mm-hmm.
mostly because when I first started out, we were going out Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And we were taking Tuesdays and Thursdays off because there were really very many classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays back then. So when we came to the summer, it was Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And they didn't have classes on Wednesday. So we just started going Mondays and Fridays. Just kind of kept that. The summers are kind of desolate, at least they have been. They didn't used to be. There used to be a decent amount of students out there in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And it went fairly well. But I think with a lot more students are doing internships now, right after their freshman year, before they didn't do it till right before their senior year. So more doing internships. There's more online classes that they can take.
Sure.
So there's a lot fewer students there during the summer, mostly freshmen, which is all right, but they kind of run in packs, come as a group, leave as a group.
Yeah.
And but I like to keep in it. I like to keep the mind working or whatever. And we do have Arts Festival, which comes, but now this will be the first Friday we're back. It's usually like the second week of July, the week after the 4th. And so that's like the big week. Got like 100,000 people in town, and we're right at Willard's, right there in the walking path.
Mm-hmm.
So we get a lot of people walking by. And of course, you get the artists on either side, and they complain because they're all about free speech until they don't like what you're saying.
Yeah.
So they complain. They've even called the police oftentimes, and police, thankfully, haven't done anything. But that's what I've noticed about the artist types. They're all about free speech, and then you say something they don't like, and they want to shut you down. So it's
Mhm.
really kind of this kind of totalitarian mindset. Only our speech can be heard,
Right.
which makes you wonder how well they can defend their speech or their ideas. Because if you can really defend your ideas, what do you care if somebody's saying something other than that?
Hmm.
Challenge them if you want,
Right.
and show that your idea is better than theirs. I remember, I think I've said this before, but many years ago, back when students used to hang out on the steps there was a guy who used to come by, and he was a Holocaust denier. And he would come by, of course, on Jewish holidays or holy days or whatever. And Jewish students were getting kind of upset by it. So one day, I think it was maybe even the last time he was there, um, students came by, like three or four of them, and said, "Look, well, we want to go to the university and get them to ban this guy from the university. What do you think?" So, well, if you do that, then everyone's going to wonder, well, what were they afraid of? What didn't they want to hear? What didn't they want us to hear? And actually going to give the guy more credence and kind of make him into a martyr.
Hmm.
So if you really want to get your best Holocaust defender out there, challenge him to a public debate in Schwab Auditorium or somewhere, which is right across the way from Willard, and show people that he's wrong. That's the
Hmm.
best way to do it. So I think if people are confident in their beliefs, that's what they do. And if you can't, challenge somebody, then just let it go. If you're really confident in your belief, what's it matter if he's speaking other beliefs?
Right.
So you're only going to do that if you're not confident with your beliefs, which I kind of have a sense that maybe these artists aren't really all that confident in their beliefs.
Hmm. Well, that sounds good. Hopefully, your summer session gets off to a good start. You get back into the swing, and then when fall rolls around, you'll be well rested and ready to go. So,
Because it's kind of like if you don't use it, you lose it sort of thing,
yeah, for sure.
right? So even in the fall, since there's not too much interaction in the summertime, even in the fall when there was a lot of interaction, it would take me a little while to kind of get
Uh-huh.
back into it,
Yeah.
and kind of things would gradually come back. And because you're not thinking about it for a while, then, you know, just kind of, at least I do, just kind of lose it after a while. And it takes a little bit for it to come back. So
Yeah.
it's nice to get out there in the summertime, at least preach on some of these things so that,
Hmm.
keep them fresh.
Yeah. And I would imagine if it's any sort of new topic, not that there's super new topics, but there might be some particular angle. And I would imagine that it's probably through preaching that you really work out exactly what your points need to be, and you know um, just how it should flow and sound real good and so forth.
Yeah, it's a combination of the preaching, which sometimes kind of gives me new stuff,
Hmm.
so hit on something new. It's really the interaction back and forth
Yeah.
that hones it. Because then you hear the arguments for the other side. Maybe you have to make yours more precise, or maybe one angle doesn't work as well as you thought it was going to. So maybe you come at a different angle. And ultimately, they're either going to work or they aren't going to work. If they don't work, maybe there's something wrong with your ideas. So if you challenge somebody or somebody challenges you and it doesn't go well, it could be because your ideas are wrong. It could just be because you're not that good at defending them, or the way you defend them isn't that good. It's always good to have that interaction, because either way, that's good.
Hmm.
If you're wrong, you don't want to be wrong,
Yeah,
right?
for
You want to
sure.
have the right beliefs. And if your defense isn't that good, well, you want it to be good.
Hmm.
But you can't have that unless you're interacting with people. And most don't have the opportunities that I do to interact with people. But if you do, and you leave the conversation, just ask yourself, how did I do? Did my ideas stand up? If not, why not? If so, why so? And that's how you kind of learn.
Hmm.
If you're thinking about doing some sort of street preaching or debating or something, then that's very important, because you have to know, you know, and then that's how you hone your arguments. But you want to hone your arguments just to win a debate. I was debating with somebody out there a few years ago. He's a young guy. I think he's from the branch campus. He was
Hmm.
just up visiting. I think maybe somebody told him about me, and he was a good debater, but he wasn't about finding the truth. He was just about debating.
Uh-huh.
How can I win this debate? What can I say that help me win this debate?
Yeah.
So afterwards, I just kind of took him aside and said, look, you're a good debater, but debating should be about finding truth, not just winning. Of course, when
Right.
you're out there, everybody kind of wants to win or whatever. But
Yeah.
ultimately, it should be finding truth. So you don't want to just throw stuff out there to say, oh, well, I can throw this out there, maybe I'll win. And if you want to find out, is this true? Or am I, is this right? Or am I wrong? Or again, am I just have the wrong ideas or the wrong ways of defending it? So I don't know what he did. I never saw him after that, but hopefully he kind of changed his ways and went after truth. So that's the
Yeah.
only thing that matters in the end.
That's right. And that's a great point because, I saw a debate on YouTube recently. It was a Roman Catholic and an Orthodox person, and I would say I didn't end up watching the whole thing, but it was kind of frustrating because some of the things that in order to try to score points, the Roman Catholic debater kind of was he didn't have an organized, coherent argument. Some of the things he wasn't really actually wasn't even correct things, but the fact that he could say them and in the spur of the moment, his opponent couldn't really respond. He felt like he was doing a good job, but clearly you're not after the truth if all you're trying to do is just kind of you know confuse the conversation ultimately. So yeah, we should always be after the truth in those sorts of discussions, even if it seems outwardly like we lose. We should still be trying to get after what the essential arguments are.
And you almost can't help, especially if it's a public debate, trying to win. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's nobody want. Very, very rarely have I seen somebody say, "Oh yeah, that was a good point, and you might be right about that," or "Hey, I might be wrong about what I'm saying." So it's very difficult to do. So if you can't do it, which most of us can't, then that's why I say think about it afterwards,
Mm-hmm.
and always be after truth and say, "Hey, well, maybe this guy was right. Maybe I was wrong, and maybe I need to look into this a little bit more deeply."
Absolutely. Well, so I hope that you've I don't know, as you await the summer session, I hope you've had a kind of a restful time, recharging time, um, at least a little bit these last few weeks. So we wanted to kind of turn our attention a little bit. Normally we start these podcasts and we kind of chat about sort of what's on our minds and so forth. Sometimes we have a big topic we're trying to get to, but sometimes not so much. But I think what we wanted to chat about tonight had to do with sort of this idea that maybe somebody knows might say, well, okay, I'm growing up in this Christian faith, but how do I know that Christianity is the right religion? How do I know that, say, Orthodoxy is the right form of Christianity? Is, is that more or less what you were thinking about when we were talking about this?
Yeah, because I've run into a few people over our time that we haven't been on, who've come to me or I've seen it happen where their kids are really questioning,
Mm-hmm.
why do we believe this, or what do we believe? Why should I believe this is true?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times as parents, I should have had we showed that book that I wrote. What was it called? Something in the university or something. I forget what it was called now. Should have
Uh-huh.
had that ready to go. But because that has all these topics, as parents, a lot of times you're busy, think about this, you're not dealing with it, you're just taking your kids to church or whatever, and they come up with these questions and you don't know how to answer them. Sometimes even the priest or the pastor doesn't know how to answer them. And so the kids, I've seen many times over the years, not so much now that people don't come into Penn State having believing anything,
Mm-hmm.
but when they used to, some of them would say to me, "Yeah, look, I asked my parents this questions, and they couldn't answer. They sent me to the pastor or the priest, and he couldn't answer. So I just figured there's no answer, so this isn't right." But there are answers out there, and you know, we need to know what they are. The first thing and the most important thing, I think, is for the parents to role model, the faith, because kids are much more likely to believe what you do rather than what you say. If there's a conflict between those two things,
Hmm.
they're going to believe what you do. And so you can say, oh well, yes, this is the faith and this is what we believe. But especially these days, when I was young, we were in sports. Each sport had its season, and you played that sport for that season. If you're really into it, then you played the next one. Maybe you went from football or soccer to wrestling or basketball, track or tennis or whatever. And that was it. And when the season was over, it was over. Very, very, very few, played one thing all year round. But that's pretty much the way it is now. You focus on one thing, you do it all year round. And so a lot of times now, because we've moved away from the faith, these sporting events or these whatever they are, music lessons, acting, whatever they are happening on Sundays.
Hmm.
And so if let's say you've got your kid in some sport and it's all year round and they're playing on a Sunday, well, what do you do? Right. Well, if you say, okay, well, we're going to go watch you play this game or whatever, what's that saying to the kid? And it's really tough for the parents because they say, no, you can't play on Sunday, and the kids, could resent that. So parents have to kind of make decisions. But if you are going to let your kid play on a Sunday, then the whole family shouldn't go watching.
Hmm.
And he should do some sort of like if you're Orthodox, there's I forget what they call it, but there's a service you can kind of do in the home when you can't go
Hmm.
to church, and that should be done. But really, if you really want to do it the way it should be done, you should say, no, we're not playing on Sunday. That's not what we do. It's the day of the resurrection when we're going to church, and we'll have to figure this out some other way. And what that shows is that your child might not like that, but it's going to show the commitment level that you have and the commitment level that he should have. And so that's very important because if you don't do that, then they're going to say, well, maybe this isn't so important. Everybody's willing to not go to church because I have a game or I have a lesson or whatever. Or maybe we're just too tired, I'm not going to go, or something's going on, we're going to do this instead. All that shows your kids that you don't really care, that
Hmm.
it's not that important. And they're going to pick up on that. I'm not saying that if a child starts to uh, question or if they leave the faith, that means the parents did something wrong. That's not necessarily the case. But if you are a parent, you have to make sure that you're role modeling to your kids what you really believe. That's going to be very important. If you don't do that, then they're going to see that, and they're going to it's not going to be that important to them either.
Hmm. No, yeah, I mean, I get the what I'm hearing you say, and I think as far as how, our family is, probably yours as well, is we make, for example, we make going to the liturgy on Sunday sort of the priority that organizes everything else in our week.
Right,
So if we're traveling, well, we're not going to travel on a Sunday. We're going to make sure that we're someplace near that we can go to liturgy,
right,
wherever we are, um,
right,
and those sorts of things. If, like you said, any other plans, sort of, they have to slot in with that because that's it. That's sort of a bare minimum priority. Probably also just like you said, if your kids are around, if uh, they know whether you're praying or not at home, and that is a
right.
priority or not. Um, so it's those kinds of things, for sure.
We always tried to make going to church fun for the kids.
Hmm.
We would say, "Oh, you have to go," and wagging our finger and yelling at them and stuff. So what the family does, we enjoy going to church. We get something out of it, and so it's not like you don't want to make going to church a penalty or something that is miserable because everyone's getting yelled at and so on. Make sure you get everybody up in plenty of time, get ready, and just show that you're excited about going there. You're
Hmm.
happy about being there,
Yeah.
and then the kids will kind of follow suit. And really, it should be very, very rare that you don't make it. Very rare. There should be a very good reason. If you can't make it, and you should do something, to make up for it, but it should be extremely rare. And we do the same thing, like, but we didn't have the problem that parents have today, because it wasn't, even when our kids were young, wasn't anything going on Sunday. Sunday was still an off day. But I've noticed these days it's not necessarily an off day.
Mhm.
Um, so
Yeah,
I think and kids need to know that going in if they're going to play a sport or something. You need to know going in that, hey, okay, you can play the sport, but we're not doing it on Sunday.
yeah. No, it definitely seems like well, I mean, as far as our culture and our society, that we're either going to see Sunday as like Sunday's the day where we get a lot of stuff done, and maybe Saturday's a restful day, or Sunday is the day that like you have to catch up on your rest for the rest of the week, So it's
Yeah.
much more common to hear people talk about, oh, I just love a nice lazy Sunday, you know.
Right.
Whereas, you know, as to the degree that America's been a religious country, Sunday is the day that you attend your worship service by and large, and everything else can kind of slide with that.
It's also important that the parents are on the same wavelength with each other.
Hmm.
Again, when students used to go to church growing up, I heard many times someone would say to me, "Well, yeah, my dad was, this, and my mom was that, or my dad was Catholic, my mom was Presbyterian, or whatever." And so sometimes we went here and sometimes we went there. And almost all of them, when they got to college, they didn't go anywhere because they didn't want to choose between the two.
Hmm.
If I choose this, but I'm going to, make my mom sad. If I choose that, I'm going to make my dad sad. I don't want to make either one of them sad. So for right now, I'm just not going to choose any of them. So it's important, especially if you're Orthodox, that both parents are Orthodox. And I know it's tough these days, and that, and two of my kids married people that weren't Orthodox, but they became Orthodox very shortly thereafter. One was a catechumen when they got married. The other one became Orthodox very soon after. But that's very important. It's very important for the parents to be on the same page and both be ideally Orthodox, and so that there isn't that division and
Hmm.
the kids see a united front, so to speak. That's very important. So anyhow, what do you do when a kid comes up to you and says, "Mom, Dad, how do I know that this is the right religion? How do I know that this is the right faith?" And I think one of the first things that I would ask is, um, well, who do you think Jesus is? And see what they say. There aren't too many options there, right? I mean, you have a man claiming to be God. He's either God as he claims, or he's a bit crazy.
Hmm.
He could be a charlatan, but most charlatans don't go to the cross, And if they know they're faking it, if they're deluded, like I think David Koresh in your home state, your state of Texas, there, in Waco, I think it was, he had this cult, but I think he really believed he was some sort of Messiah figure. He was willing to go down with a ship, so to speak, because he really believed he was going to be resurrected. Somebody who knows that they're a charlatan, when any sort of real persecution or real pain comes along, they don't usually stick around unless they're making lots of money off the deal. So that doesn't really make sense. Jesus didn't come across as a charlatan. But then again, neither did he come across as a crazy man. You can't read what Jesus said and what he did and say, yeah, here goes a loon. So I would really ask the kid, who do you think Jesus is? And if they say, oh, he was just a prophet, like maybe the Muslims say, well, then the question is, well, what was the point of that? Right? They already had Moses and the law, and there's probably lots of other moral laws out there at the time that we were failing to keep. We weren't keeping any of them, at least not perfectly. And so, what's the point then if you're not keeping? Jesus brought a moral law, and is arguably the best moral law ever because it took the moral law from the outward to the inward. Yeah, you had to do the outward stuff. You couldn't do this and this and this, but you also had to be insistent on the inward. Jesus said, if you lust in your heart, you're guilty of adultery or fornicating or whatever already. So if we weren't keeping the outward law, just doing the outward things the way we should, And then God comes to us, oh, I know, we'll give you even more difficult law, one that goes to the inward. That'll help you. You know, what parent would do that, right? You give your kids some sort of standard and they're having difficulty making it. So to help them out, you give them a higher standard that you know they're not going to make. And what you do is you help them keep the standard. That's what Jesus came to do, right? He came to make us godlike so we could keep the standard that he brought, which was a godlike standard. So if that's who Jesus, if Jesus was just a prophet, that was meaningless. You know, when the Muslims say, "Oh yeah, Jesus was a prophet," see, we're exalting him more than the Jews are. Well, but what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
Why do we need another prophet? And why do we need a prophet after him? Nobody's keeping these moral laws perfectly. So what's the point? The only reason it makes any sense is if Jesus is the God man and he came to make us godlike, he came to defeat death for us, he came to defeat sin for us, he came to right all the wrongs of the fall and make everything right, then that makes sense. Otherwise, what's the point of him just being a prophet? And what did he really? Yeah, he took the moral law from the outward to the inward. Other than that, I mean, it was basically the Old Testament law. I was just reiterating it, and then he was taking it to the inward. Okay, but again, how does that help us? It really just would have hurt us. Now we're guilty of even more sin. So that would be my first question: who was Jesus? And see what they say. If they say that he was, just a lunatic, but, I've met some people who claim to be Jesus, who claim to be God. I forget which one, and you can tell pretty quickly that they're out there. They don't make a lot of sense. You know, people that are delusional don't make a lot of sense. But Jesus made a lot of sense. So that would be my first question to any buddy who came to me, young teenager, whatever. Who is Jesus? Or anybody really? Anybody who grew up Christian who's doubting Christianity. Who is Jesus? Who do you think? Who do you say that he is? And does what you're saying make sense compared to what we see in the scriptures and who Jesus was? Can you really read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and say, "Yep, there went a crazy, there went a loon, there went a liar, there went a charlatan"? No, it just doesn't come off that way. So I think if you're honest, I mean, I would say, of course, you'd have to say, yes, he was telling the truth, that he was God. Because if not, it's just delusional.
Mm-hmm.
Delusional people don't make that much sense. And even if you don't believe the miracles that Jesus did, just read what he said. It was, people read the Gospels all their life and still learning from them.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the words of a delusional person. That would be my first question.
Is so let's when I think of this kind of question, I'm usually thinking of like maybe a young person that's grown up with some sort of Christian background or understanding,
Right.
right? And in your mind, is this kind of moving towards someone who, they grow up with it? My kids, they're growing up in the Orthodox faith, and they think that anything else is kind of doesn't make as much sense or whatever. But at some point, and maybe it's a gradual thing, but at some point they're going to have to really own it for themselves.
Right.
So is that kind of what you're thinking about in this sort of case, like asking them questions so that ultimately they step into sort of that discovery and that ownership of their faith themselves?
Yeah, but yeah, just trying to stimulate that thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But remember that we all have to remember that Christianity is this relational religion.
Mm-hmm.
And so, one of the things we talk about here all the time is asking God to make himself known to us in a way we can't deny.
Mm-hmm.
And that's definitely true if you're doubting whether God is there or not. If you're doubting if whether Orthodoxy is true or Protestantism or Catholicism, lots of ways of looking at that if the person says, yeah, I believe God exists, I just don't know, and I believe that Jesus is God, I just don't know which one of these expressions of Christianity is the true one. You can show pretty clear, well, you can pretty much say Protestantism is really difficult to defend because it didn't start till the 1500s. It's all over the map. every church is believing something different and worshiping some way different. So is that really what you find in the New Testament? You find denominations in the New Testament. So I ask Protestants that, do you find denominations in the New Testament? And say, no, it doesn't seem to bother them. It should bother you because it's not the way it's supposed to be. It was a unified church. When the apostles were trying to deal with circumcision, you have to be a Jew to be a Christian. You have to keep the Jewish law to be a Christian. And they had a council. They all got together, all the leaders of the church got together. They at the end of it, they said, it seems good to us and the Holy Spirit and to us. And they gave their decision. No, you don't have to be a Jewish to be Christian. These are some things we expect of you along those lines. And then that was good for all the churches. Right? There was no, and if you didn't like it, you didn't just go start another church. Or if you did, you were a heretic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it wasn't like every church is equal as long as you believe 3 or 4 or 5, basic things. It's not what you find in the New Testament. So that's easier. Catholicism, I think you can show the filioque that Jesus or the Holy Spirit proceeding from the Father and the Son does violence to the Trinity. And so the Trinity is 3 persons, 1 God. So all the characteristics have to fall into that paradigm, either shared by the 3, show 1 God, or specific to the 1, to show distinctiveness of persons. And the original creed did that. Only the Father is the Father, only the Son is the Son, only the Holy Spirit is the Holy Spirit, only the Father begets, only the Son is begotten, only the Father brings forth the Holy Spirit, only the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father. That shows distinctiveness of persons, and they're all, one essence, one mind. They're all almighty. We have all these characteristics. They'll have love and goodness and so on. They have all these characteristics that they share in common to show 1 God. But when you get in there and you say, no, the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son, you're giving a characteristic to 2 persons of the Trinity.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's the Father and the Son that are bringing forth the Holy Spirit. Well, how does that work? It doesn't show distinctiveness of persons because it's shared by the 2. It doesn't show 1 God because it's not shared by the 3. You can show things like that with Catholicism. With Orthodoxy, what you can show is, and this is what I found, is that every doctrine that we believe, when you go back to the very earliest writings that we have on the subject, which were always before the year 200, which is very early on, where the Orthodox Church is consistent with, right? The Catholic Church is not, because they changed the creed. There's some other things that we won't get into now, but that they changed. Well, you can show that with the Orthodox Church. So that's more of a historical thing you can bring to your kids.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, day in and day out, you can be crying out to God, God, make yourself known to me in a way I can't deny. Especially if your kids are questioning whether God exists or not,
Mm-hmm.
Or whether he's the Christian God or not. You can show the things we said about Jesus, but you can also have them say, crying out within their heart, with all their heart, day and night, God, make yourself known to me in a way I can't deny.
Mm-hmm.
They'll do that, and they only want to know truth, and they don't give up, and they persevere. Eventually, God will make himself known to them. I had one guy one time say to me, well, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to ask God to make himself known, but it can't be Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Well, are you really looking after truth? We're looking for truth. Lots of spirits out there, not looking for truth. And you're basically open the door to any spirit out there that wants to, say, hey, I'm God. And they'll do it. If you're always looking for truth, even if you get messed up for a while, you'll realize it, because ultimately, lies always have a glitch in them. They're never airtight. You keep pressing and pressing and pressing, and you'll say, oh, that doesn't make sense. That's the glitch or whatever. But the truth isn't like that. So be seeking after God, be seeking after the truth, asking these questions. And another question is, what about the disciples? They would have known. See, I don't know if you want to get into this quite yet. Do you have something to say before we get there?
No, that sounds fine.
So the disciples, their story was, we saw Jesus die. The Romans were expert at killing people. So the idea that, well, he wasn't really dead, doesn't make sense on a number of for a number of reasons. One of the reasons was Romans killed a lot of people, crucified a lot, but they knew somebody was dead or alive. So they saw him die, and 3 days later they saw him resurrected in a glorified body. Just didn't stumble out of the tomb, with the same. It was the same body, but it wasn't this fallen, earthly, body. It was more of a. It was the same body, but it was more ethereal. It was more angelic-like. He could just appear and disappear at will. And so he had a resurrected body, they said. And then they said, well, he spent a period of 40 days teaching them after that. And then they saw him ascend into heaven. That's a lot to say.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just, they're kind of hanging around the campfire after Jesus died. And all of a sudden, Peter jumps up and says, I think I see Jesus' face in the flame. John says, yeah, I see it too. And then one by one, Matthew says, yeah, I see it too. And so it must be a sign. Well, that can be definitely doubted. But when they say he rose bodily from the dead, nobody's ever been able to produce his body. It was a glorified, resurrected body. He spent 40 days, and all the disciples, and there was at least 120 of them, all heard the same teaching for 40 days. But there's no such delusion like that out there. Even though there's only 12 of them. Well, Judas was dead, but there's only 11 of them. There's no delusion out there where all 11 people for 40 days see the same delusion and hear the same deluded words for 40 days. It just doesn't work. So they're either telling the truth or they're lying. Question is, if they're lying, what was their motivation? Right? They already had a perfectly valid religion in Judaism. There's no sense that they were looking for a different religion. There's no sense that they ever thought they were anything other than Jews. They thought that Jesus was the awaited Messiah. So this was the fulfillment of the law and the prophets, and that they were, I don't know what they saw, how they differentiated themselves from the Jews who didn't see that. They were the fulfilled Jews or whatever, but they thought this is the fulfillment. They weren't looking for another religion. They weren't seeking fame or fortune. There's no evidence for that at all. There's no evidence that they got fame or fortune in their lifetime. So you can imagine somebody making up this story because they got something from it. Maybe they wanted to start a new religion and be the head and be the man. And they didn't even do that because they always pointed to Jesus. But, so they didn't get fame or fortune. So, some people will start a religion and they'll make a lot of money out of it. And you can see, okay, well, they're making a lot of money. Plus, they would have known he wasn't resurrected. They would have known that, therefore, the religion they were preaching was worthless. Worthless to them, worthless to everybody else, because everything about Christianity hinges on the resurrection. If Jesus didn't rise from the dead, he's not God. He did. If he rose himself from the dead, well, that's about good a proof as you can get. If he didn't rise from the dead, he didn't defeat death. He didn't defeat death. He didn't defeat sin, because death comes from sin. Sin brings death. So, all of what they were saying would have been a lie, and they would have known it was a lie. They would have known it wouldn't help them. They would know it didn't help anybody else. They weren't getting fame or fortune. They didn't seek fame or fortune. And every single one of them except John was killed. And they were all persecuted. John was persecuted. They tried to kill him a number of times. I think they threw him in a vat of boiling oil at one time or something like that. God always protected him. He had ended up dying a natural death. But they're all persecuted. Some of them were tortured, they were crucified, they were beheaded, whatever. None of them ever recanted. None of them ever said, oh yeah, sorry, I don't want to die for this lie I'm not making anything out of. So, one of the things you can bring up things like that to your kids or to anybody and say, well, what was their motivation to go through with this obvious lie if they knew Jesus didn't rise from the dead? And why didn't the opposers of Jesus, why didn't they ever find a body? That would be the easiest way to make this religion go away. Here's his body right here. And they had resources to do that, but they're never able to do it. So I think these are some of the things you can bring up, along with asking God to make himself known in a way you can't deny. Mm-hmm. And between all those things, I think you can at least give them things to think about, things that might say to them, hey, there's something to this. Maybe I need to look into this again.
Hmm.
So but that's kind of some of the things I came up with. But the other thing you have to listen to your kid or listen to the other person. Where are they coming from?
Right.
You know, and asking questions is good. If they say something and you can ask a question that stumps them, I wouldn't get into a knockdown, drag out debate with your kids, but asking questions, giving them some of these ideas, don't just throw everything on them and, pound them over the head with it, but say, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And when you say this, what do you mean by this? And why do you think that's true? And so on. A lot of kids, they just haven't thought it through.
Hmm.
Most of them maybe didn't have an experience with God yet. And that's what they need. And so you can pray that for your kids, that God would make himself known in a way they can't deny.
Hmm.
However that looks for that particular kid. Not all kids go through this,
Yeah.
but some do. And as parents, we should all be prepared. I was fortunate doing what I do to be dealing with this all the time. Most
Hmm.
aren't. Um, so I wish I had brought that book up that I wrote. Can't
Oh,
believe
hang
I
on.
can't.
I found it on your website. So
Okay.
let
Can't
me
even believe I
share
can't
that.
remember the title. It's been so
Yeah.
long since I read it.
Let's
Probably
see.
should update it, but I think it's still be good. And it's written simply for anybody to something the Christian in the university. That's it. Christian versus the university is that? Yeah, Christian versus the university. And it's written very simply. I'm a simple guy. I'm not some sort of intellectual egghead or something. So I just put down the things that I talk about out of Willard. Very simple, very straightforward. Made for middle school, high school, college, adults. Anybody can read it because it just puts the stuff out there plainly. So if your kids are having problems with this, I would suggest, and I'm not doing this to make money. I make virtually nothing out of this, but go get that and have them read it. You read it, talk to them about it, and see what they have to say. And I think that, especially today with things like homosexuality, especially transgender, is still on the rise, and I don't think it's going to go that far. Maybe it will, but a lot of kids these days, a lot of young people these days, their homosexuality is like it's a foregone conclusion, and it's okay. So they'll say things like, "Well, Christians say homosexuality is wrong. Why is it wrong?"
Hmm.
And this gives you some ideas as to what you can say to them. But one of the things I've been saying recently is, um, you know, there's certain things, this is good works for transgenderism too. Certain things we all know to be true. One is physical reality is never wrong. Thoughts and feelings are oftentimes wrong. And those two things conflict. Physical reality is always right because it can't be wrong. So when they conflict with your thinking or your emotions or your beliefs, your thinking, your emotions, your beliefs have to be wrong. So when the homosexuals come at it, they say, we were born this way. The physical reality says that everybody has a heterosexual sex organ, everybody, which means physically we are heterosexual. That's who we are by nature. We're heterosexual. If our thoughts and feelings conflict with that, then why in this one instance, or maybe an instance of one or two other things, transgenderism, maybe abortion, whatever, why do all of a sudden our thoughts and feelings trump physical reality? They don't do that in any other aspect under the sun, right? If we're thinking a certain way, and the scientists, prove beyond a shadow of a doubt, or at least as much as they can, that we're wrong about that, what do? We just say, no, we're right. All right. If the Earth goes around the sun, suppose the sun going around the Earth, and that can be shown to be true, why hold on to your old belief? Physical reality is never wrong, no matter how emotionally you are tied to it. So yes, you can say that homosexuals maybe from a very early age have this belief, this uh, desire, whatever it is within them. But is that consistent with who they are as a physical being? And if it's not, then it's not the physical being that is wrong. The same thing with transgenderism. If you have male biology, and you're thinking you're female, well, your thinking is not in line with the physical reality. Physical reality can't be wrong. And these are certain things that I didn't put that in the book because I wasn't thinking along those lines. There are many other things in the book that, again, and if, taking this from another angle, if somebody doesn't want to believe, there's nothing you can do to make them believe. All right. So if you're talking to somebody, maybe not your kid, maybe somebody else, and they don't want to hear it. There's no sense pressing it. I was probably in my pride or whatever, I used to think, well, if they just hear the same argument for the 600th time, maybe they'll see it's true. But it never worked that way. All they did was get more and more hardened in their own belief, and it would break down. We get upset with each other. We get frustrated with each other. And back then it always come back for more. These days, I don't know that Gen Z really does. So we really have to keep it on a level of, okay, we're now starting to say the same thing over and over again. Let's stop.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say, okay, let's agree to disagree. We'll move on to something else. We'll take this up later, maybe. But there's no sense just getting to the place where we both get frustrated and angry. There's the same thing with kids. If you're talking with them and starting to break down or starting to get angry and frustrated, just stop it. Not doing anybody any good. And it's been a long time for me to learn that. So I'm kind of giving you the benefit of all my mistakes. But so if you can stop it and you can take a step back and say, all right, well, we'll just take this up later. Think about it. I'll think about it. Maybe in a few weeks or something, we'll talk about it again. And during those few weeks, pray for them. If you're Orthodox, pray that Jesus pray for them. If you're not Orthodox, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on, Josie or something. And then after that, you can just say, have mercy on me. And and it kind of, God knows who you're talking about. Obviously, who you're talking about. But we just, however you're going to pray for them and see what God can do. Because ultimately, ultimately, we can do our part, but ultimately, it's God, between God and them. And ultimately, God has to be able to get through them. And there's people that even God can't get through them. That's why there's a hell. Mm-hmm. Because people become so hardened in their beliefs and so hardened in their unbelief that they just become eternally unrepentant. And then God, who respects our freedom, even his hands are tied. As maybe you've heard many times, God created Adam and Eve. They have the best parent in the world, and Adam and Eve went wrong. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily the parents' fault. This is just some things parents might be able to do to help maybe mitigate it to begin with by making sure that going to church is a priority. If it's impossible to go, it's absolutely impossible to go, make sure you do something. But if it's possible to go, make sure you go. And don't give the kids the belief that their extracurricular activity is more important than going to church. Because they'll take that and they'll run with it, and they'll end up someplace where you don't want them to end up.
Yeah. So we're showing your book, The Christian versus the University. This link is your website, so it's thewillardpreacher.com. Under Learn More, there's book by Willard Preacher, and you can see you can. I assume this is print on demand. So if you click on this, you can purchase that, and it's a really nice resource.
It's not very expensive, like $10 or something.
Yeah, something like that.
It's easy to read, just gives you basic arguments that at the time when I wrote it, I remember that was these were all the arguments I was using on campus. But again, I'm not an intellectual. These aren't like intellectual egghead arguments. These are just basic, straightforward, kind of the things we talked about here. Not difficult and you give it to your kids, and they can read it on their own. Mm-hmm. I would suggest the parent get a copy and read it first or whatever. But so they can understand it, then give it to the kids. And I'd say any kid from middle school on, and any kid is conversant with things like homosexuality and premarital sex and drunkenness and so on, whatever age that is for you. And you may want to read it just to make sure it's appropriate for your particular child. Yeah. There's all the things that kids are dealing with. I don't think there's anything on transgenderism in there. Should probably update it and put that in there. I don't remember if that was much of much of a thing back then. I don't think it was,
Yeah, I
but
think
virtually all the other ones are.
yeah, I think probably when you were writing this, that was probably still in the days when the transgender group was not really part of the LGBT or LGB student groups and so forth. So it was not as widely accepted and therefore not as widely a topic of discussion. So,
Yeah, that was funny when they first kind of started to come out. They wanted entrance into whatever they were back then, LGB, I guess,
mhm.
lesbian, gay, bisexual, whatever it was, group. And the homosexuals and the lesbians and the bisexuals said, nope, you can't be a part of our group. And we used to make fun of that.
Yeah,
If you're too perverse for the homosexuals, you must be really out there.
yeah,
But now, then eventually they got in. And I think in the fall they said no. By the spring they said yes. There's a lot of pressure put on them, I guess. And now they've got so many letters you can't even keep up with it.
that's right. Well, and it is an interesting thing. Like on one hand, um, that's probably a place where some young people are probably coming from, which is to say, well, you know, my friends say that if you're a good person, you have to accept this sort of thing, but Christianity says it's not a good thing. Um, so how do I know Christianity is true? Like that's a part of for a young person who wants to be seen as a good person, who wants to be doesn't want to fight with their friends or what have you. That's a kind of a key piece. So I think that's where having a resource like your book or just having a parent that's willing to discuss these things is really helpful because they need some help navigating those sorts of arguments because otherwise the culture just says, yeah, you're to be a good person you must believe this thing, so come along. Um, so I do think that that's kind of a real sticking point for young people.
Yeah. And sometimes some people just need to know that Christian beliefs, morals, ideas can be defended,
Mm-hmm.
whether they agree with them or not. I remember talking to people who say, "Oh yeah, I would debate my Christian friends back in high school, and I always destroyed them. They never had any good arguments. They were just looking for somebody with a good argument, or it would be necessary for them to find somebody with a good, whether they agree with it or not. They can walk
Mm-hmm.
away saying, okay, well, those were some decent arguments. Maybe this thing can be defended.
Yeah.
And your kids may need that too, because they hear all this stuff in school. It's a lot of peer pressure in
Mm-hmm.
the public schools. And I would never suggest that Christian parents send their kids to the public schools, but if they're in the public schools, they're getting a lot of peer pressure. Like you said, if you're a good person, if you're a nice person, if you're a kind person, if you're a gentle person, if you're whatever, then you'll agree with us. If you
Mm-hmm.
don't, then you're some sort of demon devil person. And that's
Yeah.
difficult for anybody to deal with, much less, a 13-year-old, 12-year-old, or even earlier these days.
Right.
Elementary school, they're getting this stuff. And it's very, very difficult for them. So that's why it's important. Like I said, I wouldn't send, when we were trying to figure out where to send our kids to school, this was back in the 80s, and then early 90s, into the 90s and whatever. Um, the reason for me anyhow, I think my wife Karen, she said, well, she was a teacher. She had a degree from Penn State as a teacher, and she said, I just don't like the way they're teaching. I don't think the curriculum's very good. For me, it was, and she agreed with this too. It was, do we really want to send our kids, however many hours, 6, 7, 8 hours a day, maybe longer if they're in extracurricular activity, to a place where they're going to hear the exact opposite what we're trying to teach them. Then they're going to come home and, it's going to be, they have to do their schoolwork, to eat dinner, maybe at that time, watch something on TV or whatever. And do you really have time to unravel everything? Are you even going to know what's going on? Much less have time to unravel everything every single day. So we didn't want to send our kids someplace where the peer pressure was such, and let's face it, the culture is antichrist.
Mm-hmm.
That we baby boomers, I was on the tail end of it, but I agreed with all of it. I didn't really know it was antichrist at the time because I didn't have any religious background, but it was antichrist. They were fighting against Christ back then. And so now they've got this entrenched into an antichrist culture. So you want to send our kids to a public school system, and there's some good ones, but most of them aren't. That's going to be the exact opposite of what we're trying to teach them.
Mm-hmm.
Then do we expect them to come out of that in 12 years or however long they're in it and be, Christian people. Maybe.
Hmm.
Some people say, well, you got to because they have to be tested. They don't have to be tested in first grade
Right.
or even sixth grade, or even
Right.
ninth grade. I mean, you want to have those years where you can solidify in their faith and they can solidify it within themselves without all this peer pressure. And then when
Hmm.
they get out, yeah, you do have to allow them to go into situations where they're tested, but not, from first grade on, not from kindergarten on. That's just gonna be very difficult to overcome.
Yeah.
And if they do overcome it to a degree, it's going to affect them. It's going to be difficult for them to really be strong Christian at the end of that. Maybe some of them might be, but many of the people that I've seen who have sent their kids to public schools, a lot of them, just aren't Christian anymore, aren't Orthodox anymore, or whatever.
Hmm.
So we have to be wise as to where we're sending our kids and what they're taking in day after day after day after day. It's just
Yeah.
like eating. You take in junk food and it's going to affect your body.
Yeah.
You take in junk beliefs, it's going to affect your soul.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, just the sheer number of hours that they're there, to the degree that, they're, like you said, they're certainly hearing things that are going to contradict what you as a Christian parent are saying. But just the fact that they're there so much of the time is going to erode any sort of authority that you have, any kind of trust with you. The teacher, and they're telling the kids all about, the expert scientists say this, or the expert sociologist says this. Suddenly the opinion of the parents doesn't matter so much,
There.
and it just kind of erodes what should be a really natural bond between the child and their parents, uh, just by sheer fact of so many hours away from the home. You hear some things like the average kid actually gets to spend like 35 minutes with their parent when they're in each day while they're in public school. Because, like you said, they're there for many hours, and then there's sports or extracurricular stuff, and then there's homework. And just how much time do you think you'll really bond and influence and connect with your child if all that's happening?
Yeah, it just overwhelms them.
Yeah.
And like I said, most parents are not apologists for the faith.
Hmm.
That they're not living that life day in and day out. And so the kids have these questions and maybe they don't answer them very well. And that just reinforces to the kid that oh well, this Christian stuff doesn't have a leg to stand on. And again, like I said, I've talked to students on campus over the years that said even their pastor couldn't.
Hmm.
And pastor maybe yelled at them for even questioning.
Right.
And so
Well,
you don't have to have the answer right there,
hmm.
but you have to say to them, I can find the answer for you, and then go to
Right.
some resource or talk to somebody, or have them talk to somebody that has the answers.
Yeah, well, that might be one of the worst things. That might be about the worst response that you can have, which is, you know, to get upset that they're even asking the question.
Yeah,
Because I can remember being years ago being on the steps of Willard and someone came up to you and said, do you think we should just all agree with you about everything? And you basically said, no, I think you should question and seek the truth. And
yeah,
the guy it didn't quite register with the guy that was asking you that, but if they I mean, we're kind of talking about, on one hand, they might be asking a question because of kind of school and societal peer pressure, but to the degree that they are asking a question to get to the truth of what is behind it, as in who is God and how do I know that, say, Christianity is true, I think it's essential that you encourage that kind of questioning, as a parent, that you're not freaked out by it, that you trust that you can find an answer together, if you don't know one, and that you also ultimately that you trust that God is there guiding this process and helping them along the way, and that God is able to show them what is essential. So
yeah.
it's
That was a good
yeah.
point. Try to find it together.
Hmm.
In these times, there's lots of stuff on YouTube or whatever you can watch, debates or whatever. You can sit down with your kid when they're a little bit older, watch a debate on YouTube, discuss it. But when a parent gets offended or gets upset when their child is questioning the faith, parent may want to look at themselves and say, well, how much do I believe this?
Hmm.
So I think if you really believe you have the truth, you welcome questions because it's those questions that lead people to the truth. But if you're not sure yourself and you're being questioned and you're not sure the answer yourself and you're not sure that you necessarily have the truth, then in a self-defense mechanism, you're just going to kind of get angry and shut it down because maybe it's revealing something in you that you didn't want to be revealed. So, I would just encourage every Christian parent, every Christian out there, learn the faith. If you're an Orthodox Christian, learn why Orthodoxy is the truth. If you're not, question Orthodoxy, question Protestantism, question Catholicism, whatever you're in, question it and see, is this really the truth? And hopefully, as much as you can, and I know this is extremely difficult, nobody can do it perfectly, set yourself up and say, okay, if what I believe is not true, then I'm going to accept that. It's extremely difficult to do,
Hmm.
especially when you're really tied to what you believe. But that's or if you're watching a debate or something, okay, I'm going to watch this debate. I'm going to really try to see who has the better arguments. That's just not going to assume that my guy has the better arguments.
Hmm.
Does he? Because your guy might be right, but he might not have the better arguments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think your ministry and your witness is really consistent with that. I think you as a godless barbarian, you sought the truth and found Christ, and then while you were a Protestant for several, like what, 15 years, when you were questioned about Catholicism and Orthodoxy, uh, you investigated those things in an honest way and discovered the truth of Orthodoxy. And you know, I think at that point it was probably not very clear that your life wouldn't change radically if you aligned yourself with Orthodoxy, but that you trusted God that if you were seeking the truth, that was going to work itself out. Um, that's one of those really helpful things, I think, which is you can say to people, "Look, I've sought the truth, and um, when the evidence showed me this, then that's where I followed it." So it's a great thing, great witness.
Yeah, when I started out obviously defending Protestantism, and I did that for months and months and months until Jimmy, I think at the behest of Father John, but I'm not sure, said, "Find me sola scriptura in the Bible." The Protestant out there just isn't there. It can't be there because there was no Bible to say, "Hey, the Bible's the sole authority." But when I realized that there wasn't anything in there, and if you're out there and you think that there is, and you want to send us an email, whatever we have up there, go ahead and we can talk about it. Or if you even want to come on and talk about it, we can do that. We do have one debate with a Protestant, one with an atheist out there if you want to watch them. But when he said, "Find me the idea that the Bible is the sole authority of Christianity in the Bible," I thought for sure I was going to find it.
Mhm.
I was very confident when I believed. When I couldn't find that, then I knew that shook the foundation. Then I knew there's a problem. Houston, we have a problem. There's definitely a problem then, and then one thing led to another, and I actually started looking into Catholicism and Orthodoxy to prove them wrong.
Mhm.
So I can't say that I was like this objective seeker for truth, but ultimately, truth did manifest itself, and it will if you seek it.
Mhm.
And if you really want it. There's no reason not because we're only on this planet for a short period of time, and some shorter than others, some longer than others. But even those that are in here for 120 years, it's nothing compared to eternity. So why just hold on to and God is truth? I mean, if there's a God, he has to be truth. So because of the lie is the breakdown of the truth. So you have to start out with the truth. So why seek for anything else? It's ultimately not going to do you any good. It may temporarily make your life more comfortable for you. In the long run, you're going to be destroyed by the lie. Lie will destroy you. And so we should always be seeking after the truth because ultimately that's all that's going to matter. So when we stand before the truth, with Christ, everything's revealed. Everything. Can't hide anything. You're standing before the truth, and the truth will expose every lie that you believed and why you believed it, why you held on to it, why you didn't seek for truth. Everything's going to be revealed. So, don't wait till that point in time. You don't know when that's going to be. And we all have this kind of great faith that we're going to live to be, 80, 90 years old and have a 2-minute warning before we die.
Mm-hmm.
But, a lot of people just kind of up and down. Even those who do have the 2-minute warning, and do know they're going to die, maybe they get cancer or something, still don't necessarily seek for the truth. Still they have this, and I think personally, I think it's because we have an eternal soul and a mortal body. So on the one hand, we know we're going to die because we see ourselves getting older. We see everybody else dying around us. On the other hand, we have this immortal soul that testifies to us of eternal life. And we get those kind of things mixed up, and we almost, we know it's not true, but we live as if we're going to live in this life forever. But we're not. And we have to come to that and deal with that many times in our life. And so better to do it now than wait, because if you wait, you don't know if you're going to be here later. So death comes for us all, and we all should be prepared for it by knowing the truth.
That's right. So encourage our kids to seek the truth and support them in that. It seems to be the way to approach it.
Cry out to God day and night. God, make yourself known to me in a way I can't deny. All your heart, only wanting to know truth, never giving up. And you'll find it. And then you can supplement that with all this other stuff if you wish.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's as we've said on here many times, that's at the heart of it, right? The Christian faith is not per se just a list of things that we agree with. It's an encounter with the living God, and so
Right.
that's what we want to deepen all the time.
And we don't want that list, which is important. We don't want it to become the most important.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's not just that. It's those things are necessary because of the way that all of those things kind of feed our experience and relationship with God.
And all those things were obtained by prophets and saints and so on by their experience with God.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the thing about the scriptures. If you look at the scriptures, they're all written by people who've had the experience of God, or writing about people who've had the experience of God, or write about, the nation of Israel who was, led by God or judged by God or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about the experience. And sometimes we can miss that. That's what it's all about. So hopefully that helps somebody.
Yeah, that's right. Hopefully someone who needs to hear that gets to hear it. So that would be a great thing.
Yeah.
Well, that seems like a good place to stop then. But I think we covered a lot of ground with regard to, what do you say to maybe a young person that says, how do we know this is true, and how do we proceed with that? So we, as always, have a lot to say. So hopefully some of it was helpful.
Hopefully.
Yep. Well, Gary, it's getting kind of late in State College.
Always late in State College.
Christ is risen.
Deity is risen.
All right. Have a good night.
Yep, you too.